Hi everyone, my name's Melissa.
My name's Sarah.
And today we're going to be talking about climate change.
So let's get started. In 1974, President Nixon is quoted with saying, "Each of us, all across this great land, has a stake in maintaining and improving environmental quality."
President Reagan, who signed the Montreal Protocol, which banned certain substances which deplete the ozone layer, was quoted as saying, "Preservation of our environment is not a liberal or conservative challenge. It's common sense."
Experts say that annual damages from climate change will be approximately 3 to 5% of our GDP each year. Numerically, this means climate change will cost America damages valuing from $500 billion to about $1 trillion a year.
99% of scientists agree that climate change is happening. 41% of economists say it's already impacting our economy. 63% say it will impact our economy by 2025, and when the year is increased to 2050, 89% of economists say it will affect our economy.
The impact of the greenhouse gas effect has been seen worldwide. Global temperatures are rising. In 2016, it was the warmest year on record, with 8 out of the 12 months being the warmest on record for those months. Through the end of September, 2017 is seen to be the second hottest on record globally. Ice sheets in both Antarctica and Greenland have been losing mass since 2002. Global sea level has risen about 8 inches in the last century. The greenhouse gas effect is also causing an increase in intensity in natural disasters. Hurricanes have been seeing an increased surge and rainfall. Warmer ocean temperatures and melting land ice have caused about 7 inches of global sea level rise over the past century. Storm surges are higher, sending water higher and further inland. Rising temperatures are causing worsening drought in other parts of the nation, making fires more likely to occur. Overall, the West is seeing trends towards more large wildfires, burning more acres with longer fire seasons. The greenhouse gas effect is also impacting the oceans. There's an increase in the amount of carbon dioxide that is being emitted into the atmosphere, so more of it is being absorbed into the oceans. More carbon dioxide being absorbed in the ocean is causing the pH to decrease and become more acidic. Coral reefs are extremely sensitive to temperature change. This increase in temperature change is causing coral reefs to become bleached and weakened. Other ocean species are also finding it harder to survive. For example, the increased acidity is decreasing the calcium carbonate needed to build and sustain shells.
We've seen that the greenhouse gas effect has major impacts on our environment, but economically, what's causing this? One of the major factors driving this in the economy is the idea of externalities. Now, the definition of an externality is an external benefit or cost that is enjoyed or imposed on a third party other than the buyer or seller of a good. For example, consider the following question. What is the optimal level of pollution? Now, we've heard about all of these negative side effects of pollution that lead to the greenhouse gas effect, so many people would say 0. We don't want any pollution at all. But basic economic theory tells us that there's actually an optimal level of pollution and pollution abatement. And we can see that whenever we set marginal benefit equal to marginal private cost and marginal social cost. Here, let me show you. The best way for me to explain this is through a graph. As you can see, on the y-axis we have price, and on the x-axis we have quantity. Now, in this market, because there's an externality, we have to assume that there are actually 2 costs. We have to assume that there's a private cost, which is seen by this blue line right here, and a marginal social cost, which is seen by the green line. Now, marginal social cost is equal to marginal private cost plus the cost of the externality. One reason why marginal social cost is always going to be higher than marginal private cost is because if you consider in the case of pollution, whenever you're buying a good that maybe emits pollution as it's being produced, you are not incurring the total cost associated with that good. The pollution doesn't just affect you because you bought that good. The pollution is going to affect everyone in the market, potentially. So whenever we're considering the equilibrium or the optimal outcome for that good, we can't just think about marginal private cost. We have to also take into account that cost of the externality. So, when we consider this, we look at marginal private costs again and marginal social costs. Now, when marginal private cost is the only thing that's considered, we can see where that intersects demand is going to be a higher quantity, so right here, than when marginal social cost intersects demand. Which means that in a market that only considers the private costs, we're always going to have too much of that good. Now, that same market that's only considering private costs is leading to something known as the deadweight loss, which is this red triangle right here, kind of in between the social cost and the private cost. Now, deadweight loss in economics is known as a loss of efficiency that can occur when an equilibrium for a good is not achieved or not achievable. And deadweight loss decreases welfare overall. So whenever we move from only considering private cost to then considering marginal social cost, we're getting rid of that deadweight loss triangle, which means we're increasing our welfare overall. So moving to a market where we start to consider social costs instead of just the private costs like we've been doing means that welfare, total welfare in the market, is going to increase. Not just for firms, but for everyone. As we saw in that graph, when an externality is taken care of, it can increase welfare overall. Fortunately for us, there are policies that can be put into place to get us to consider the social costs. These policies include command and control, taxes, or cap and trade systems. Now, a command and control policy would be like a technology standard. This technology standard would be set by the government and require every firm to implement a certain technology. Now, for smaller firms, this proves to be very costly. So command and control policies, while they're often the most widely used because they're fairly simple to implement, are not cost effective. The other two policies, taxes and cap and trade systems, are actually cost effective and allow businesses to choose their own abatement strategies based on what would be ideal for their company. This allows businesses to maintain their own autonomy, to make their own choices, and to have freedom in what they want to choose for their own abatement strategy. Both of these also allow for innovation and allow greater research and development to go into finding low-cost options for pollution abatement. Now, to explain how this works a little more, Sarah has a graph for you guys.
On this graph, we have emissions on the x-axis and damage and cost on the y, and we're dealing with the marginal abatement cost and marginal damage associated with emissions. As marginal abatement cost increases, you're abating more, and as marginal damage increases, you have an increase in emissions. And this is because the more emissions you have, the more damages you're going to have associated with those emissions. And on this x-axis, you can see that emissions are increasing, which means that your abatement is increasing as you move towards the origin. Your abatement is going to be the reduction in emissions associated with pollution. At point EU, you're going to be abating nothing, so essentially firms are conducting business as usual. And at point E1, this is going to be the optimal level of abatement and emission. If you have a cap and trade policy, for example, E1 is going to be the number of permits in the market set by the government. And if you have a tax policy, which can be seen with this red dashed line, the government is essentially going to set that tax where your marginal abatement costs are equal to your marginal damage. And firms are going to have to decide what is going to be the cheapest cost for them. So it's either going to be have them paying the tax or they're going to be abating. If you look on the graph where you have this red line that indicates the tax, if you are above this line, firms are going to pay the tax because it's going to be the cheapest option. And if you are below this line, firms are going to abate because that is going to be the cheapest option. So firms are going to have to choose what is cheapest, which is most likely going to be abating because they're going to choose the lowest cost option until they get to point E1.
As Sarah showed, firms are able to determine their level of optimal abatement. Now, the government has two options. They can implement a tax, or they can impose a cap-and-trade system. With a tax, the government is going to set the value of that tax equal to marginal abatement cost and marginal damage to reach that optimal level of emissions. The major drawback here, though, is that the government often is not sure what the optimal level, or what each firm's abatement costs actually are. So they have to rely on the firms to be very honest and forthcoming about what their abatement costs are, and hope that when they set that tax based on the information they've received, it does get to that efficient and optimal level of emissions. Now, there is room for trial and error with taxes, but as taxes are often hard to get passed in legislature, they try to get it right the first time. Now, in a cap-and-trade system, the government would set a cap for the amount of emissions they want for production in a market. And then they would issue permits equal to that emissions level. They would distribute those permits to firms, and based on the firm's own marginal abatement cost, firms would be able to buy and sell permits from other firms in order to reach that level of abatement. So if a firm's abatement cost was much lower than another firm, that low-cost firm could sell their extra permits to the higher-cost firm and make a profit off of that while increasing their own abatement since they're getting rid of permits. So we've seen there are options for policymakers to guide the market to the optimal level of pollution while maintaining business autonomy and increasing overall welfare.
In this video, we've discussed both the environmental and economic impacts of climate change.
We've also talked about some of the mechanisms in the market that can lead to reducing the emissions that cause pollution.
Hopefully this reduction in emissions will mitigate some of the effects we've previously mentioned that climate change is having on the environment. Thanks for watching.
Bye!